Across philosophical traditions and cultural contexts, the concept of sacrifice, especially in relation to loved ones, has been treated as both a moral virtue and a complex ethical dilemma. The question of how much one entity might reasonably wish another to sacrifice for its survival invites reflection on autonomy, consent, and the boundaries of moral duty. In many human relationships, acts of sacrifice are common and often celebrated. Parents may endure physical, emotional, and financial hardship for their children. Partners may compromise personal goals for the sake of shared well-being. Friends and strangers alike may risk themselves in moments of crisis. These sacrifices are typically framed as voluntary, foreseeable, and grounded in emotional bonds or social norms. However, when the beneficiary of sacrifice is an entity unable to express desire or consent, such as an embryo or fetus, the ethical terrain shifts. The pregnant person may incur significant risks or burdens, some of which are unforeseeable. In such cases, the sacrifice is not always chosen, and the moral justification becomes contested. Some frameworks emphasize the potential personhood of the fetus and argue for its moral consideration. Others prioritize the autonomy and rights of the pregnant individual, especially when consent and foreseeability are absent. The broader question, how much sacrifice any person ought to make for another, remains unresolved across ethical theories. Utilitarian models may advocate for maximizing overall well-being, even at personal cost. Deontological approaches stress the inviolability of individual rights, resisting coercive sacrifice. Care ethics and relational models suggest that moral obligations are context-dependent, shaped by intimacy, vulnerability, and mutual recognition. Ultimately, the degree of sacrifice one might reasonably wish upon a loved one is not universally fixed. It depends on the nature of the relationship, the foreseeability of harm, the capacity for consent, and the moral framework applied. In cases involving entities that cannot reciprocate or express desire, such as embryos, fetuses, or unconscious patients, the ethical calculus becomes especially delicate, requiring careful attention to autonomy, dignity, and the limits of moral demandingness. Thesis statement. The concept of self-sacrifice in parenthood, especially in relation to embryos and fetuses, raises critical ethical questions about consent, moral expectation, and the boundaries of personhood. If all entities are treated as persons, then the degree of sacrifice expected from one for the survival of another must be carefully examined through the lens of autonomy, foreseeability, and relational ethics. Structured argument. Sacrifice as a moral ideal. Across cultures, parental sacrifice is often idealized as a moral virtue. This includes physical, emotional, and economic costs willingly borne for the well-being of offspring. However, moral admiration does not equate to moral obligation, especially when sacrifice is involuntary or unforeseeable. 2. Embryos and fetuses. The ethics of asymmetry. Unlike born children, embryos and fetuses cannot express desire, reciprocate care, or consent to the sacrifices made on their behalf. This asymmetry complicates moral expectations. Is the pregnant person morally required to sacrifice, or merely socially conditioned to do so? Treating the fetus as a person may imply moral consideration, but it does not automatically justify overriding the autonomy of another person. 3. Foreseeability and consent. Ethical sacrifice presumes some level of foreseeability and consent. When complications arise unexpectedly, or when the pregnant person did not fully consent to the risks involved, the moral weight of sacrifice shifts. Survivor-centered ethics prioritize the rights and dignity of those who bear the cost, especially when that cost was not chosen. 4. Relational ethics and moral boundaries. Care ethics suggests that moral obligations are shaped by relationships, not abstract principles. A parent may choose to sacrifice more for a child than for a stranger, but this choice must remain voluntary. Imposing sacrifice without consent undermines the very relational dignity that care ethics seeks to protect. 5. Implications for policy and advocacy. Legal and medical frameworks must account for the complexity of sacrifice, especially in reproductive contexts. Survivor-centered models advocate for autonomy, informed consent, and the right to refuse disproportionate sacrifice. Ethical systems must distinguish between admirable sacrifice and coercive expectation. Impartial narration. The ethics of unacknowledged sacrifice. In relationships marked by deep emotional bonds, such as those between parent and child, the impulse to sacrifice often arises without request or recognition. A parent may forego personal aspirations, endure hardship, or accept a life of pain in service of their child's existence or well-being. Yet when such sacrifice is made without the child's awareness or consent, a moral tension emerges. How much burden should one person bear for another's life, especially when that burden alters the course of their own? If the child, now grown, reflects on the magnitude of that sacrifice, realizing that their parent's life diverged from its potential path into one of suffering, they may confront a difficult question: would I have wanted this? The answer is not universal. Some may feel profound gratitude, believing that love justifies any cost. Others may feel sorrow, even guilt, wishing that their parent had chosen self-preservation over silent devotion. Still others may question the moral structure that allowed such sacrifice to go unchallenged or unacknowledged. This dilemma intensifies when the sacrifice was unforeseeable, when the parent could not have predicted the depth of pain or the loss of opportunity. In such cases, the child's retrospective wish becomes a moral mirror, not of obligation, but of empathy. It asks, if I were the one who benefited, how much suffering would I wish upon the one who gave?